Welcome to the DNA of Things, where we explore the intersection of DNA, environment, and behavior to unlock our human potential. Today's episode is really a personal reflection, specifically on my first year as a father. And I'm joined here by Brandon Larson, the creator of Fantastic Dads. Now, this year has pushed me to rethink everything I thought I knew about human performance, family systems, and how we nurture the next generation. I was grateful to have Brandon and Brandon's expertise in systems thinking and human development, as this has provided an invaluable roadmap for navigating this transformative journey. So now, if you're listening as either a parent or a coach or simply someone passionate about shaping the future, this conversation offers valuable insights into raising and nurturing resilient, capable individuals. Let's dive in. Well, it's great to have us back here on the DNA of Things. I did a lot of thinking about this podcast, like probably more thinking than I've done on any. And, I started to think as to like, why? And I think the simple answer is just the topic and the pursuit, the goal is the nearest and dearest to my heart, right? So what is it they say is wherever your heart is, so there is your treasure or something like that. And yeah, so it was funny because our first podcast, I sent you kind of like, hey, here's the frame. This is what we're going to talk about. And I just kind of was reflecting on our conversations previously, not just the podcast, but, we've been connecting every 2 weeks since Brooke was born. And I just harken back to just the natural flow that came out of those conversations, and every one of them, I found you were just like in your element. So I don't want to constrain the conversation, if that makes sense. But on the flip side, I did put together like topics that like I thought we could talk around, and if we fall off, like actually that's cool. I'm fine with that. But I'll tell you what I was thinking. If you like this, we can kind of go from there. So, obviously, Fantastic Dads, in my experience with just the first 52-week guide for engaged fatherhood, the whole blending of scientific insights with practical advice, crazy awesome, like created by you, Brandon Larson, like from, Red Bull to rockets at NASA. And, you're impassioned by human development, human design. And in as much as, I've come to learn like, hey, this isn't a parenting educational journey. It's not even an educational journey. It's really much more of an experience. But what I would take away at a high level was the emphasis on, it was communication, motor skills, emotional bonding from day one, and, empowering me, the father, with actionable strategies and to foster deeper connections and confidence in supporting my daughter Brooke's early development. So there, is a very comprehensive review of what's covered in the 52 weeks on the website. So to dive in a little in more detail, there's like communication, motor skills, sensory engagement, stress management, emotional connection, resilience, developmental science, modern tools and mindsets. And, there's various recaps and reviews throughout the process. So, I think about the experience again through the year, and something that you said on one of our calls, which was, you had done all of this work previously. And I think a lot of your colleagues were like, hey, like, why don't you write a book? And you're like, yeah, books are where ideas go to die. Okay. And so you created this resource. And, I got to say, consuming the content in this way, plus being able to connect to you and to be connecting to the broader community, was like, wow, I just really didn't feel alone as a dad. So I want to obviously offer up any experiences, to the broader audience, to dads, to members of the Fantastic Dads community, to people who know dads, because there's no, believing is seeing or, experiencing. So I definitely, I want to be as open a book as I can to talk through some of the experiences I've had, the value that I was able to extract from the program and our relationship. But it also kind of brought me to, kind of three central themes that for me kept coming up throughout, my experience with the program and in our conversations, even if they weren't explicit. To me, they were implicit. So these are the three things. There was this notion or concept of individualism. There's this notion of, human development and human development in the context of, thinking in systems, right? And then the last point was really, it's like it kind of begs the question, like based on the name of the, the initiative, the company, Fantastic Dads. It's like, well, what is the role of the dad, right, in our current modern society? What are, versus what are the parental roles? So I was thinking maybe we could kind of kick around philosophically those like three things, like individualism, human development, and thinking in systems, and then, the roles of the father. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, no, think, I think I think it's really interesting, all of it. So yeah, I'm totally okay starting there and then falling off, as you said, because sometimes that's where the most fun stuff happens. I'm also realizing that this thing is not, it's not allowing me to pick it. So I'm going to do this and then we'll just get the audio we get from the laptop.
Okay.
How's that sound?
Well, your sound is coming through great.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, this thing's way perfecter, but
Okay.
I'm not a stickler for the equipment dampering progress in a conversation.
Okay. All right. Well, so with that being said, so let's jump off from just individualism, right? Because I think, like, why did I reach out to you? Because you hear this whole notion of to raise a child takes a village. And I clearly was not part of any village. I think, like, being a dad, I was very alone in the world, bought into the paradigm of, go out into the world and have your adventure and, go do it all by yourself kind of thing. And, do it in isolation or separate from a family. And okay, that's fine when you're in your 20s. And I mean, maybe in your 30s or 40s if you're never having kids, but as soon as you start to invest in the next generation, you're kind of like, wow, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I don't know. Like, so when my daughter was born, for example, it was like instant respect for my dad and my mom. It's like, wow. And, maybe this is only unique to me. I don't know, but the realization or the experience of a love higher than anything that I've, ever experienced, the closest I could imagine to grace, love undeserved kind of thing. It's like, wow, I would do anything for this being. And she hasn't done anything, quote unquote, to deserve it. So, okay, there's arguments there that that's biological. Hopefully that's not all it is, that we're these automatons. I don't think it is. I don't think I'd be spending this much time trying to understand if I was. That's probably too deep for this conversation, but, so the point is individualism, right? So, we started to go around and like look for communities. Like, okay, well, oh, there's like the conscious parenting. It's like a group put on by like doulas, people who do at home childbirth. There's, you know, just by sheer randomness, like other moms in our building, there happen to be two other moms. Okay, great. That was helpful. And then, we discovered a church nearby where there seemed to be like a young, group of members, a lot of them new parents. And, so here you have this, discussion group, but none of those things were a substitute for family. And, I think a lot of people maybe struggle with that as parents. I know I certainly did. So, maybe, yeah. So we can start there in terms of your thoughts on individualism and, how is that good or bad for, what we're seeing for that parents have to contend with today.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I want to just reframe a bunch of things real fast.
Please.
And if you agree, then let's go for it.
Okay.
Okay. So I think big picture, when like my background is problem solving. That turned into engineering. That engineering turned into how can we do complex problem solving? That turned into a lot of work in systems. Systems and systems engineering, systems theory, system thinking, all these cool names that humans have invented to describe these things and try to convey that to other people is essentially the ability to just really look big and broadly at everything that may contribute to the operations, the function, the inputs, the outputs to any kind of a process. And, when you have a thermostat in your house and the thermostat is just your old rheostat kind, it's a little coiled spring that as the temperature changes, that spring expands or the spring contracts. And based on the contraction of the spring, it activates things in the sensor. So when you have things blowing around in a single room and the air is maybe angled not directly at the thermostat, then you get an average of the heating in the room or the cooling in the room, and the thermostat reacts on a time constant, some time scale. And then that gives a signal back to whether the thing should be on or off. In different areas of science or engineering or even in computer science, this might be called a state machine. So what state is the thing in? What state can it transition to? So in a thermostat, you have air conditioner on for heating, air conditioner on for cooling, because again, conditioning the air, not necessarily like AC, like we think about it today as cooling, but AC can mean any conditioning of the air, changing in temperature. So now you're looking at it's heating, it's cooling, or it's broken, or it's off, right? So you have 4 states. Then you start adding some complexity. You add things like the Nest thermostat, which has all these smart features and it tries to learn. And really the reason why is it's trying to understand the patterns and the time delays that happen in rooms and happen with people. One thing that happens quite often, and most people I think have experienced this, is why is that one room so cold? Why is that other room so hot? Air conditioner's it. Turn it up, turn it up, turn it up, turn it up. And you're always chasing the control of the system, right? So the system's not designed very well, or we're having to put in extra layers or parts or logic into a system in order to make it behave the way we want it to behave, but which may be challenging, right? So that's just the concept behind systems and a little bit of this idea of problem solving. But in order to think about a big system, you have to understand all those parts. And the only way you understand those parts is by asking tons and tons of questions. And those questions are what allow you to turn over the proverbial stones to find all the components or the answers that gets you to a more well-defined problem. I think there's areas of problem solving that have gotten a lot more popular in the vocabulary of people these days. One of those is this idea of first principles, getting to the root of something, getting to the kernel of truth. Again, lots of language that describes the same thing, which is essentially how well do you understand the entire problem space? And there's this really cool quote from Einstein. I'll probably botch it, but in the intent of Einstein, it's if I was given 60 minutes to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes on defining the problem and 5 minutes on the solution. And I think that is eloquent and has just so much wisdom packed in it, because when you spend time understanding the problem, you never have to solve anything because it solves itself. And so in my time in engineering, in my time at NASA, in my time with the Boeing company long ago, in my time in startups, that is what all good problem solving looks like. And that is what all good systems thinking allows you to do. It just allows you to really understand the problem and what those inputs might create as outputs, or what are called emergent properties. Oftentimes when we are surprised by the outcome of something, usually in very big complex systems like social policy, new laws, regulation, and even human development, we find that we do all these things and then we're surprised by the output, or the emergent properties of the system are different than what we predicted. And generally that means there wasn't enough horsepower of perspective or diversity or thinking on the problem solving time. We jumped right from, instead of Einstein's advice of 55 minutes on the problem and 5 minutes on the solution. We probably spent 5 minutes on the problem, 54 minutes on the solution space itself. And then 1 minute scratching our head going, why isn't this like we thought it was going to be? And so there's that aspect of it. Then we bring this back and we kind of frame it through the lens of human development. So one of the things that I feel very honored and lucky to have been a part of was 8-9 years spending time with what we would call an elite human performance team at Red Bull, where we worked with those Red Bull athletes. We looked at their goals. We looked at their desires. We looked at all the things that they wanted to accomplish in their life. And we as a team integrated systems, right, into a plan that would allow them to achieve those things. And I think the most marvelous of those are when you have an Olympic athlete and that Olympic athlete comes in and they have 4 years, right? 4-year cycles for the Olympics. So if you're a winter athlete or a summer athlete, you will not compete in that Olympics again for 4 more years, usually. And you need to be the best you've ever been in a 2-week window, hopefully like a 2-day window, 4 years from now in the future. So there's a lot of things that you can take away from the science of this, from how you do periodization, program training, strength conditioning, nutrition, health, recovery, push, off time, the whole shebang. And that allows you to try and analyze a system against a desired emergent property or a desired outcome, and then work that system in such a way that in 4 years from now, you have everything you need at your disposal to dominate that day and find yourself on the podium. And there's a lot that goes into that, right? Even luck, because again, talent, some people think, success equals talent. Other times it's really more like success equals talent plus planning. It's like, well, success is probably equal to talent plus planning plus luck or unknowns, right? Wind doesn't blow the right way one day and you're in a different place. So there's always that acknowledgement of the unknown within systems as well. And that's usually where people get bitten on the emergent property is not what we thought. Okay. So that's systems and that's problem solving. And problem solving is super important to look at from a first principles perspective. So then we go back and we say, all right, human development, fatherhood, kids, everything you just talked about. What are all the different kinds of inputs that go into a system of a child? And then extra layers of that, which are parental influences and then environmental influences and the social influences and culture influences and weather influences and all the things, right? From the river all the way to the moon, looking at the river from far away, watching the solar system spin. And so this is what I find to be the beauty in it and the importance in it, but also the lens to look through, which is you have to look at development through a systems lens and really try to get down to first principles. So even when we talk about like individualism, the first principles within anything related to people, with anything related to culture, history, you have to understand where it came from and why we do things the way we do. Because as we know globally, there's kind of a spectrum of cultures and people who are more individualistic as societies and cultures who are more collectivist as a society. I mean, personally, I don't think that any extreme ever is a good idea, mainly because in the early part of my educational experience, let's call it, I was trained as a physicist. And in physics, everything's looking for an equilibrium. And so a lot of times when I look at things, I see many things as a pendulum swinging, right?
Yeah.
And so societies may swing to one edge and realize we went a little too far. But the natural tendency in complex systems is to push back to an extreme the other way, but just a little less.
Right.
Over time, you would come and you'd find that happy middle space,
Right.
that median area. Like you can think of everything from speed limits in the United States to being none, to too fast, to too slow, to just right. You can think about that in in almost everything. And you can see how well developed something is by how many extremes or how many variables there are, and whether that particular concept has consolidated into something that's meaningful and useful, right? And so I think individualism is a little bit different than an individualist versus a collectivist society. But long time ago, if we go back to the tribal days where we were all trying to work together to make society happen, to stay alive, the old cyber tooth, or not cyber tooth.
That's in the future.
That's the future, yeah.
Sure, yeah.
The old saber tooth in the bushes thought experiment, right?
Right.
Is that it took all kinds of people. And so there's been a lot of neuroscience studies, brain development, brain imaging studies that allow us to see different wiring in the brain. Some people, when they get stimuli, they go more limbic. Some people go a little bit more amygdala. Some people are more anxious because you have to wonder if there's something in the bushes that's going to kill all of you. But then you have to have some people in your party who are wondering if that tribe over on the other side of the field maybe has some resources and you guys should work on a partnership. But then, of course, somebody also needs to say, well, but if we go over there, maybe they might kill us. So let's like only send 3 of us, right?
Right.
Let's scout it out.
Right.
And so humans develop all these systems because of the diversity of our ability to think, and then to use those for productive action. And so that's a collective type behavior, right? Sometimes you can get maybe, like, let's just say in other collectivist societies, Japan is one, the South America, Latin America, you have a lot more individuals who will stay in the family unit. You'll have many families that live together. You'll live in tighter quarters. You'll be more respectful of the whole. You might not be as inclined to litter if nobody else does. There's just unwritten rules that everybody adheres to in a collectivist society. Good, bad, right? You could say that maybe one of the bad things or less desirable things in a collectivist society is that if everybody is kind of in the same constraints, then you have less people being very creative and getting out of that and creating innovative new approaches. So then when you look at collectivist countries or individualistic countries, you do get a little bit more innovation. So you look at Australia, New Zealand, the United States, North America, and you'll have that. But if you get into extreme individualism where it's me, and me, I'm first and I do everything, which starts feeling a little like maybe selfishness or a little less community, or it can translate into a lot of things. But that individualism is something that then becomes part of a culture. And I've tried to think about this for a while is, what are the building blocks of a society? What are the building blocks of culture? Do you adhere to the rules of the individual? Do you adhere to the rules of the and values of the family? The rules and the values of the neighborhood, of the town, of the zip code, of the county, of the state, of the nation? And you can kind of start pinpointing what countries adhere to what kind of structure. And I find that in the more collectivist countries and societies that lean towards that direction, again, if we're just going left versus right on a continuum, then you have more of that village when it comes back to raising kids. Because you're in it together, there's shared aspects to these things. And this is just one dimension, right? So there's 250,000 areas of gray in this. That's just one dimension of it. You can still be like highly competitive and want to beat everybody and still be in a collectivist society. Right. And vice versa. You can want to be at commune and peace with everything and everyone in an individualistic society. So there's all these other affecting factors, and it's really unfair to just pinpoint it on this, but this is one of the things you look at. And you kind of look at it back to, the founding of the United States and North America and Western parenting practices, and how we put that becoming dependent or independent of others as a marker of success in your life. If you can go out and be a lone wolf and at an extreme, right?
Right.
And so that's sometimes where you see that. But then there's all these other factors when you look at a system of why we raise kids the way we raise kids currently. And that ranges from everything from in the United States, there were a lot of changes societally in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There were more females in the workplace. There were families that were moving away from each other as opposed to being co-located in the same city. So you lose your support structures. There was all this ability to work from different places. There was the chasing of an American dream. There's a lot of things.
Yeah.
So those scattered everybody, and not everybody, but scattered a lot of people. It made that the norm to go out on your own. You get kicked out of the nest at 18,
Mhm.
and I think that that's an interesting thing to just think about. And then obviously you have to decide what works right for your family and your values. But yeah, and I don't think, like, I'm a real big stickler on the meaning of words. And so even when we say, like, I would like my kids to be able to be independent, meaning to have some independence in the things they do, which means really to me, they have the skills and the competencies and the capabilities and the mental wherewithal to be able to navigate challenging situations.
Mhm.
Now, I nowhere in that did I say alone,
Mhm.
because again, like, have a competency is to know when to ask others and when to rely on the social structures and when to not carry the burden yourself and when to not. But other times you have to read the room and you say, look, everybody's busy and something needs to be done. So I'm going to go and do that thing.
Mhm.
If I run into trouble or I get in pickle, then I know how to ask. I know how to ask for help. I know how to get help from others. And you look at anything like elite sport teams, elite military units, that's the idea of team. A
Mhm.
lot of highly capable and competent individuals,
Right.
but the beauty comes when they're working as a team.
Well, for sure. Interdependence
Yeah.
is the crowning jewel, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we go from dependence as children to independence to interdependence, and that's where synergy happens, right? I want to just pause to make sure we highlight a few gems that came out of there. First of all, the Freudian slip from from saber tooth to cyber tooth, that requires future examination because our future stressor is going to be the cyber tooth, right?
Yeah.
Maybe. But I just wanted to say, like, so you're speaking, as an engineer, my call it formal training is really more in evolutionary biology, molecular ecology, if you will. So I think we come to a similar view from different starting points, that is to say, understanding evolutionary process itself as as a system is open to much discovery, for that's to say the least. But after having read the book, by your recommendation, Thinking in Systems, a primer by Donella Meadows.
Yeah.
So to hear you speak in those terms, and you referenced Einstein in the beginning, like, let's focus most of the time on understanding the problem and, get to the solution with the maximal amount of context and information. I mean, it's similarly, I think might have been Voltaire that said, we need to come to terms first, right? So, and you're
Mhm.
talking a lot about language. I mean, a lot of the challenges in, let's say, team dynamics and, business is by not aligning on what's in this term sheet. What exactly do you mean? And it takes a massive amount of critical thinking and patience and humility and grace. And so I think all of these things are, definitely something that come into play, certainly, as a parent, right? And so I'm delighted that you brought in, the systems frame, because we're not going to get to any one thing as, say, the root cause necessarily on this conversation. The one thing I'll highlight from Danella's book there that I really loved was her definition of like a paradigm, right? So, I mean, this is a known the paradigm isn't the landscape; it describes the landscape to the best of our ability based on the known information. But there's a ton of unknowns, and there's the whole unknown unknowns, et cetera. But it's towards the end of the book where she really kind of like builds into this like spiraling out into infinity. And it's this big kind of joke, which I thought it was really unexpected to hear this metaphysical finish to the book from somebody who's like a pragmatic engineer, or so I thought. But it was really like, hey, the humor is, well, the humility comes from being able to let go of a paradigm by recognizing that it's not the landscape, it's only describing it. And then, by the way, you're going to go through this endless cycle of discarding paradigms. And then the paradigm that paradigms even exist is the ultimate thing to let go of. And there's your cosmic joke. Like I've never heard anything more spiritual. And it was so profound that it was coming from somebody so pragmatic. So,
I mean, this is my wife, my friends close to me. This is something that they always rib me for that I do, is that I'll give some crazy science explanation for something, really try to explain the nuts and bolts of why things happen the best that we understand. And then I think it may be just out of habit, is I usually at the end just say, but it's all made up anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, that's just true. That's
Kind of it's real.
I love that. That's right out of Marvel Comics. Well, where was it that he was going to? Nowhere, or anyway, there's some place they're going to, and Drax is like, that's a made up word, and he's like, all words are made up, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we have to parent our children, right? So, okay, like how does okay, I want to just kind of put the nail in the coffin on individualism / ist, the false homogenization of those two words, first of all. But I think regardless, I think maybe, and I could be wrong, it's one of the reasons why you created this resource, right? It's like, well, where do I go to get like the chicken noodle soup for human development? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And you're like, as a dad, you're like looking for, it's like, where is it? There's a lot of stuff, for moms. And so like, I want to be helpful. So like, where is all this information? And I think in a way that's maybe more than, well, chicken soup, but not to say that there isn't value in old wives' tales, let's say, but where is the, pragmatic roadmap to human development? And then how do I, as an engineer, extract from that and then help other dads? Like, so what made you do this? Like, was it a byproduct of this, thing that I'm feeling, or was it just kind of, no, I got there on my own, and, Jeremy, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. No, I mean, like the whole way it started was just wife tells me, hey, we're going to have a kid. And I was like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'd always been a take it or leave it.
Yeah.
I have kids, I'm going to do it. If I don't have kids, I'm going to do it.
Right.
And when she came in with that little trippy pea stick, I got choked up. I got excited. I was really happy. And then all these thoughts started flooding in about, man, I've never even actually held a baby.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I want to be raised the way I was raised.
Right.
Oh, and I was like, wait, there's probably an app for this at this point. This was like 2016. I was like, oh, everything's an app. And then there was also just the thoughts of, there's probably a good book. Google knows how to do it. Cool.
Yeah.
But as I went and started looking into learning about the role of a dad or the role of a father or how kids are raised, I found it was based on either lots and lots of what I call I thinks.
Yeah.
This is a nice way of saying opinions. Because some opinions are good, some opinions aren't so good. It's all just information. And then the other bits that were researched just had the fault or fallacy of scientific research, which is it's very hard to do a multivariable analysis because you don't know what variable contributed to the outcome of the system. So in science, you have to like tease everything out and hope that you identified the thing that you think might be the total compounding variable. And then you watch that thing over enough samples to go, yeah, I think this is correlated to this, or this is what causes this. And in complex system, that's very, very challenging to do. I joke sometimes that the only way you'd ever know about all these multivariable interventions would be that if you created probably 3,000 or 4,000 parallel existences of me and my children,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
isolated each variable or each set of variables and let those 3,000 lives play out,
Right.
you might learn something.
Maybe.
You'd probably learn something that is taking us on scenic routes in other areas that we're not even looking at, right?
Right.
But that's just the hard part of it. And so I love science and good quality science because, and especially like hard sciences like engineering, I love them so much because it's like, this thing broke. Why did it break? That's
Mm.
why it broke. Here's the stress analysis. Oh, there was like bad stuff in the aluminum. Like the aluminum was weaker than we thought. Crap.
Right.
Oh, let's redo it. And you can get to a causal relationship real quick. But with
Mm.
humans and people, it's hard. And even then, and again, I know I'm taking a little bit of a scenic route on this, but I think a lot of the science that we have relied on for current to inform a lot of current practices or understandings of child rearing come from observational science.
Mm.
So, fMRIs, looking at DNA at scale, blood work at scale. This stuff has only been around for way less than 100 years,
Right.
like way less, right? And so because of that, we've relied a lot more on observational science, like from psychology and things like that. And in areas like psychology, you end up setting up the language for things. Like I believe resilience is a word that came from psychology, but only until we saw like Bruce McEwen. He's kind of more of the father of biological resilience.
Mm-hmm.
He developed concepts like allostasis and allostatic load.
Right.
But he's the one who then you get this bit of a consilience between what we observed a long time ago and kind of create these definitions from. And now we're stuck with these definitions, and then we can meld them into biology, and then later we can meld them into neuroscience by looking at brain imaging or EEGs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, it's always where are you in your area of understanding, and try to be humble in that you don't know much.
Right. Right.
But that's where I realized, like, wait a second, nobody knows anything about raising kids, but we're right on the precipice of starting to understand quite a lot. Because by
Right.
this point, I think fMRIs for kids had been around for maybe 10
Yeah.
years. So we're starting to look into
Yeah.
it. And that allowed me to then realize and snap back out into my life as an engineer and as a kind of a sport performance scientist guy was, look, same way we do the athletes, creating a plan 4 years out, figure something out, baby steps, periodization, scaffolding, Vygotsky zone of proximal development, all sorts of stuff that
Mhm.
elite coaches know all over the world. I
Right.
realized that elite coaching and being a father were so tied together. Like it
Yeah.
was almost the perfect model for it. And because you navigate complexity through relationships
Right.
and knowing your athlete, that is the same thing as that. And it was interesting because it felt so blind to that. And then even back to the individual stuff versus collectivist is that in collectivist cultures, you're around a lot of other people and you get to see all the different parenting strategies and approaches and what works and doesn't. And somebody will step in and do something and you see that, you learn from it, try it on, then maybe you adjust your behavior. Now you're doing something different in your style.
Right.
We don't do that as much in individualistic societies where the village has become one or two people, and that's like a big challenge, right?
Right.
So from
Yeah.
there, it was just all right. Let's look at this from a system for
Mhm.
myself and develop a plan for myself so that I can understand what the first principles of being a dad are.
Right.
Now I can utilize that information with any first principles there might be of development of a human through the lifespan.
Mhm.
And how can I create interplay in those so that maybe it's less stress, more confidence, maybe better outcomes. Hard,
Right.
right? But
Right.
that's where it all started.
Yeah.
And then research. At this point, I've been researching this stuff for as like an incessant hobby, like focus for 9 years maybe. And yeah, with 20 years of problem solving experience backing that and highly
Mhm.
complex systems such as human space exploration. So
Mhm.
all those things coming together just have allowed this ability to like
Mhm.
kind of try to see through a lot of the noise and try to find what works. And, now with Fantastic Dads, I'm in the process of documenting all that and making it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible.
Right.
This is why I love how much you've enjoyed it over the last year.
Immensely. And, just a quick note on high performance coaches being like, well, you're in a way perfectly trained to be a dad. I think of someone like one of my mentors. I mean, I see him as like the godfather of human performance, Dan Paff, 13-time Olympic coach, predominantly focused on speed power athletes. So, prominent sprinter or jumper. Dan's probably worked with them, works with a lot of NFL athletes as well. But, it was really funny to go to, some of their training sessions, some of their learning sessions. This is like apprenticeship coaching programs, or there's also like performance therapy programs as well, put on by Altis, which is one of the organizations I believe he's head coach at, or advisor. And, it's funny, you get a lot of young coaches coming in and, asking very particular and specific questions like, oh, how many sets of bench should I do, or squats? And, Dan's answer like 10 out of 10 times was like, it depends. And, it would move, let's say, the conversation to that bigger kind of, systems thinking, like the biology, the human performance as an ecosystem. And by the way, not just the individual, but its connection to other people and the environment. And so, it is, in a way, when I thought about like starting this program, for example, it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to know the answer. And it's just like, dude, do you even know the question? Was kind of one of the things that revealed itself to me. So like, say, for example, like we talk about this idea of, you talked about resilience. Your resilience as a dad, like your stress management, as a dad, like one of the things that, you notice in the beginning is like crying is a thing. And it can be, 40 to 80 hours a week of just crying for reasons that are described, obviously in the sessions, right? So like colicky babies, or, is there something wrong developmentally? But the thing that was, of value while we worked to solve those problems, was again, like the reframing of the situation is like, oh, my baby's crying. Actually, that's a good thing, because she wasn't crying when she was first born, right? So we did an at-home birth, and she was born in the birth pool. And there's that moment of, it's seconds, but it feels like an eternity before the baby actually cries and becomes online. And it's like, wow, crying is not a relief, it's exhilarating. And so just even remembering, that moment, and, that how fragile life is, was like an important reframe for me, from the beginning, and then, so I want to highlight that it was much more of an emotional, it was much more about managing my emotions, effectively from the beginning, because a lot of, my contribution as a father at the beginning was really about being a support to Brooke's mother, right?
Mhm.
Because it's like kind of like the fourth trimester is what they call it, right? The extra 3 months is mom and baby are like, really in close contact, and that's all Kristen could do was, have Brooke at her side for every whim, and so it's like, okay, well, what do I do in that role, as a father, right? So it's like looking for things to do that you didn't necessarily expect, right? Because you're like, oh, I'm going to be a dad. I have to be like that kind of big, alpha leader, and you're kind of like fast forwarding into, aspects of your relationship that, won't come into being until, probably age 3 and beyond, or so I've been learning.
Yeah.
But there were moments of, actually like practicable, life-changing points of intervention that I got to because of consuming the content from Fantastic Dads, which, by the way, obviously human development isn't like a 1-to-1 or 100% correlation. There's a lot of variation, but certainly at least having the content laid out in and around when you might expect these things to happen or anticipate them, and have communication around why it might be early or why it might be late. So, again, I think about, I guess this would be in the motor skills and, baby movement, progression. Torticollis was one of the things that came up. It was really minor, but I'm not even sure I would have seen it. And,
Yeah. Much less known how to ask that question.
Exactly. But, it was like two trips to the physio, and they're like, here's how to hold your baby to activate the other side of her neck. This is common, can happen. It's pretty traumatic going through the birth canal. So, here's what you can do.
And
Actually,
it's super, Yeah. And like even just the torticollis
Yeah.
one is something that I'd say at this point, I've probably talked to maybe 4,000 dads.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be around that number. And I would say that 5 to 8% have reached out and said, "Well, torticollis was something that our kid went through. And we're so glad that it came up because it was such a foreign concept to us that we were able to go quick, get some physio feedback and done. You know,
Right.
but we would not have known because, there's like this extreme in the parenting advice, which is like, kids will be kids or just let them develop or all sorts of things. But there's also these concepts that, again, it's all language, so it's all made up, but it's
Mm.
so imprecise, but it's the most precise thing we have. So let's try to use it well. There's all these groups of words that are used to like kind of bring meaning to certain concepts, like the fourth trimester, right? Okay, well, you
Mhm.
had first 3 trimesters and certain kind of roughly distinct things happen, but there's no stop and start to any of these things. It's all
Right.
continuous.
Right.
Then the fourth trimester, it's just, well, baby needs a transition. This is a good mental model
Yeah.
to have. And then there's other mental models like, oh, the first 1,000 days. Okay,
Right.
so from conception until roughly 3, and then oh, well, we're realizing the second 1,000 days is important. Okay, so 3 through 6. And then,
Right.
50 years from now, they're going to go,
Yeah.
everything's important at some point for some reason.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. No, I was just going to say and hand it right back over to you is that I think the most challenging thing is for anybody is to know what lens to look through.
right.
And that's one of the things I try to do is point out, give people the coach's eye.
Right.
Because you can have 2 or 3 coaches all do the same work, all do the same everything, and somebody's learned to cue in on the eye,
Right.
and they can see the things that other people don't in the biomechanics and the behavior and the confidence of the athlete and the lack of the confidence of the athlete, and then know what to do with that. So it's being able to take that stimuli in and figure out what to do with it and create something productive
Yeah.
for useful, right? And so
Yeah.
all that is, it's a lens to look through. And I think that every single human being everywhere probably has the best intent, but you don't always have the best lens to look through,
Right.
or they're not given a good lens to look through.
Right.
And we can say lens is just another word for like a mental model
Right.
or an understanding of something.
Yeah.
So I think that a lot of that, even when you were talking about reframes, the reframing you had to do was trying to figure out the right lens to look through, trying to use the right mental model. And in closing on that topic, all frames, all lenses, all mental models are wrong,
Right.
but some of them are useful.
Sure. Yeah. On the, call it physical development side, it really was about that. It was about applying the coach's eye to your child's movement patterns.
Yeah, the
Right.
movement patterns over time. Yeah, pattern over time.
Yeah. And, so one of the things we started to notice was, okay, well, she's doing that, that scoot crawling where she like really uses one leg to just like catapult herself, like just wicked fast, like so fast. Brandon, is it probably delayed her walking by 2 or 3 weeks because it was more, she's like, I'm not going to walk. Like, this is way faster. Cause you like, try it. It's like, no, scooting's faster.
Yep.
But then, again, you've got a relationship now with the physio and you're like, this is what we're seeing. And they're like, yeah, if it carries on for more than 2 to 3 weeks, let's stay on top of it. But, here's why she's doing it, as the reasons I just described. And then if you're worried about the asymmetry, they're like, here's how to fix that. It's like they just showed her, like, you stand her up and like hold on to something. It's like fixed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, and now of course she's walking, and I wouldn't call it walking. She like skipped over walking is like right to running. So now it's like, oh my gosh, how do we like put foam everywhere? Because she's just, getting into everything. But what it makes me think of, again, this great coach analogy is, I remember reading in Charlie Francis's book, Speed Trap. He was Ben Johnson's coach.
Yeah.
He talks about the warm up, right? And it's like, you're watching, like, you see a lot of these athletes like do these drills for the sake of, yeah, sure, maybe it's building technique, maybe it's an aspect of building fitness in that respect. But actually, if you talk to the more advanced coaches, it's actually a movement diagnostic, particularly with speed power athletes, because you don't want to get up to 110% of what you've ever run before.
Yeah.
Without having everything primed. So it's like coaches are listening to, ooh, did that skip seem off? Are they compensating? Is their right QL more active? And therefore their left glute max isn't firing. And is that okay? And like, when is asymmetry okay? Actually, one of the things that what Charlie Francis pointed to is like Ben Johnson had this like weird kind of sideways hand thing, exactly like Andre DeGrasse, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, leave it alone, man. They're running the fastest that anybody's run in the world. And I don't know how that is a part of it, but it is. And that's the least of the issue right now. And so I think that is important, is like kind of the wait and see, patience side of it. But again, it's like that is only possible when you have a community to bounce ideas off of, because sometimes things are a real issue. Like, for example, when Brooke moved from the 12th percentile on weight gain down to the first percentile, and we're like, holy shit, like what is going on, right? And then that became a whole thing with the pediatrician, and at the end of the day, we got to the issue. It was one that was probably as a result more of like emotional stress on our family, on Kristen in particular. We her brother-in-law died like literally like a week or two before Brooke was born. So there's all those things that are going on in the background, and that affects psychologically, that affects us biologically. But it kind of opened the door. Well, you want to talk about a different filter, like a different filter of analysis, and that was one more on the DNA side, right? So me, I've been thinking about DNA for about a quarter of a century, if you could imagine, and you start to see the practicability of it now in parenting, right? So at least for me, where I'll say that with a kind of an asterisk there. It was like, yes, I understand how to interpret these things, but it's a lot harder to do when you're emotionally compromised. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you get an expert to look at this with you? So there was that side of it initially, because one of the first things that the pediatrician is trying to discern is, does your child have like a rare genetic disorder, and how do they get to that diagnostic? Well, they ask you like, hey, are you guys sure you're not cousins, right? And I'm like, I have the paper that says no, and so we can actually rule out what you were thinking. But that actually it has become a very interesting tool already in diet and nutritional framing. So for example, something as that's widely talked about as like the MTHFR gene, for example. So it has to do with vitamin B9 metabolism, kind of a central metabolism for energy production, methylation, the accumulation of inflammatory compounds like homocysteine, and correlation with mental health and chronic inflammatory diseases, et cetera, et cetera. And, actually one of the things that Kristen said was, well, Brooke has one of those stork bites in the middle of her eye, which is apparently common with folks with that variant in the MTHFR gene. And I was like, well, let's check. So it turns out that, Kristen had the less effective version, or had at least one copy, and, I had the effective version. And so anyway, it turns out that,
Awesome.
Brooke got that copy. So that changes the conversation or the priority around introducing like leafy greens and, folate rich foods, et cetera. It allows us to have conversation around, hey, this idea of like these night terrors that she's been having, is it related to this nutritional deficiency? There's some research there. So you don't feel so blind. We're not being overly, diagnostic, but I mean, I think that is an interesting, place that this journey got me to. It's like, well, the better the data I have, the better decision that I'm going to make, maybe, if I have the right context, you know what I mean, and the right advisors. So
Depends.
yeah, thanks, Dan. It depends. Yeah, 100%. But it did kind of get me thinking through more of this idea, of a family operating system. And maybe before we dive into that, I want to talk about, and I want to apologize to listeners who are listening. I'm talking a lot more on this podcast than I usually do on when I interview guests, because part of this is sharing with you, Brandon, my experience, what was valuable, because it's my hope and aim to contribute to more and more dads getting access to this kind of insight, and hopefully to contribute in building this kind of community. But the place that this took me to was, right, okay, the one of the things you talked about was like the importance of consistency and ritual and routines, et cetera, in terms of providing a stable environment for the child in which to learn and grow. And it was really cool because the Fantastic Dads listening actually became like a weekly, family ritual, and it became something that we could implement in the week and, connect back and forth to, throughout different phases of development. And so, yeah, it was a really compelling experience, like where you felt like you were really, part of this community, and again, starting to bring in this whole notion of like, well, what does it mean to be what is a fantastic dad, right? And of course, a part of me is thinking about this family operating system. Like how do we like something as simple as like, hey, are our family medical records all in one place, right?
Mm.
And with all of these like emergent tools to actually analyze these things, so like the MTHFR, that's critical. There's a number of let's say tissue, the development of different tissues like collagens or different variants that I know will make Brooke vulnerable to injury. So how is that going to affect her uh, you know athletic path? So I'd like to help her avoid the mistakes that I made and have no surgeries. That would be great. Certainly not.
Probably paying attention when she goes through her biggest growing spurt where her peak height velocity is the max. I mean,
So,
almost everybody I know in sport is like, if we could tell the world one thing about youth development, don't overload kids during peak height.
right.
And that one's so easy because all you have to do is you measure their weight and their height. And when you see that curve just go in a rocket, you know that all their bones and soft tissue is softened.
Right.
So then you can figure out its new configuration for life.
Right.
And if you want to really wreck a person, like overload them during that period because they won't recover from it.
Right. Right. So, okay.
Anyway, sorry.
No,
That one's a sensitive one for me.
no. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure.
Too many unneeded injuries in youth athletes.
Yeah. And, okay. So maybe that's a great segue into the next, point is, we kind of talked about individualism. We talked about thinking in systems, and then there's like, well, what the heck is a fantastic dad? Right. And, I think I'm trying to define that, for myself. And I think it maybe is a very personal experience based on, the environment, the culture, genetics, et cetera. But, for me, and now that you mentioned, coaching as an example, so let's just say my first kind of knee-jerk reaction was, okay, I'm going to set her up with every single opportunity possible and maybe overtrain her. It's funny, like when I went into a knee surgery like 6-8 weeks ago, I was like, oh, I got time. Let me bang out Brooke's like 21-year development plan. And I like sent that over to my wife, Chris. And I was like, hey, I'm not going to die, but in case I do, here's the plan.
Yeah.
And then I look back at it and I was like, yeah, let's make sure that that's not written in stone. And again, just from this call, one of the things that I resolved, or how I resolved to define myself as a coach when I worked with high performance athletes, was I saw my role as really protecting the environment, right? So like, certainly you're in touch with first principles, in health and human performance, in that athlete's, domain. But there's this just also like facilitator and, kind of, protector of the environment so that creativity can happen and, surprise can happen. So it's not about providing this rigid structure. You must become these things and think this way, but I'm going to provide you a frame where you can perhaps discover something new and advance humanity to do something that it didn't know that it could. So that's kind of how I see myself as a dad, is like, how do I protect this space so that, Brooke can fall, but not so hard enough that she can't get back up again.
Yeah.
So I just made that up, but you're thinking about you've been thinking about fantastic dads for longer than me. What are your thoughts around like, what makes a fantastic dad? What do fathers do? What are fathers supposed to do, Brandon, nowadays? Not to put too much on you.
I know. I mean, I just have to fully also admit that I'm in that learning too.
Yeah.
My oldest is about 8.5. My youngest is 6.5. I work with a lot of kids through coaching youth sports, and I'm around a lot of kids because I'm pretty active in the school and usually in the lives as a positive role model in my friends' kids' lives and things like that. So, I can't I don't generally over-index myself too much on having experience with 9-year-olds and over because I haven't lived it. And I find that a lot of things in life, if you haven't gone through a version of the experience with a hypothesis, and you don't necessarily have, uh, you know, a mental model for it, right? Let alone a mental model that you can, uh, I don't know how to say this, but shove down somebody else's throat, right? So there's a lot of interesting things that the research tells us about what fathers and the role of the father is, the role of the male, figure in a child's life, that also in a boy's life or a girl's life. There's also a lot of information that's agnostic of the role, right? There's a lot of information about what does a adult in a child's life provide that child long term. And I think a lot of these questions are still very unknown. There's some really good hypotheses and there's some very good emerging data in a few areas. I think some of the parts of this are that humans are really good at learning, or we can be really good at learning. So it's recognizing a pattern, making an update to our long-term memory, and then having or exhibiting a new behavior next time we're presented with that pattern. And again, I like to go into first principles of, if behavior hasn't changed, you haven't learned anything, right? Or nothing's changed.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you've learned all you need to know and you found the ideal thing, so nothing's changing, which learning has stopped in that particular area. Because that's all learning is a stimuli and an update to pattern and a stickiness in the long-term memory that you can retrieve with accuracy to then implement something in the future in response to the stimuli. So again, and I'll be the first to admit too that I am hardcore on all things exist at the biological level and that everything stems from that.
Mm-hmm.
Ecology is important, interpersonal, and everything is an important contribution to understanding the system. But I think none of that system exists without cells doing things that cells do. So that's just like a baseline, just in case that's not fully understood. So the next area that I think is important in science that we're understanding more is that likely the environment and the role models and the experiences in a child's life have some correlation and some causal pathways to what is called executive function. So as our brains develop, as we get, kind of a new brain flush or refurb of the brain through adolescence, we're over time maturing that brain until, 20, 24, 25, 26 years old, depending on various factors. But that executive function is your ability to pause, take information in, and do something with it. Like kind of really boiling that down to super general, easier to understand thing. So what's that? That's helps with problem solving. It helps with collaboration. It helps with emotional reactivity. It helps with all these things because high executive function, you have the ability to create space between a stimuli and a response.
Yeah.
You have the power to do stuff with it. So I think one probably thing that is useful to try and strive for is how do you create high executive function in humans over time? And what can a dad do in their, narrow experience and influence window to contribute to that? There's also the other thing that I think is the most, or the maybe an important thing about humans that we've forgotten is that we're all born very creative. So there's this concept of these drives. So when you're born and you're a baby, you have a drive to breathe, and that breathing drive allows you to breathe, right? And when you hold your breath and you feel that discomfort in your diaphragm based on your CO2 levels, you end up having this urge to breathe so you don't die. We have a reproductive drive. It's called the sex drive. There's a lot of these drives, right? But there are some areas of research and literature that show that there's likely a thing called a creative drive that we all have when we're born. And that's also what gives us the desires to move towards objects as a baby. Wow, what is that new thing? I've never seen it before. I'm going to go over there and touch it. Oh, look, I'm doing motor stuff. Oh, my brain's developing. Wow, I can move better now because I was really curious about the block over there. And that creative drive just cascades all these awesome things. But the creative drive also seems to be what helps you with your problem solving skills. I mean, we call it problem solving, but it could be motor planning, it could be navigating a social situation, anything. Problem, solve, solution, stimuli, response. It's just problem solving. And so I think that that's that next area of, a dad's role, or again, not necessarily a dad's role, but just a role of somebody who's helping a child develop, is to help that child retain that creative drive,
Yeah.
or to find, to have the mental models to problem solve.
Right.
Now, the cool part is that once you have some of the mental models for problem solving, if you have the different tools available to you, and the tools can just be skills. So maybe one that's associated in, an area of child development I really like is these concepts of sensitive periods or windows of opportunity. There's a lot of words for these as well. But these are areas where the brain is particularly interested in laying down developmental foundations and infrastructure in the body for certain activities. So there's sensitive periods where we're more sensitive to picking up on the language around us.
Mhm.
And that's how we use our pattern recognition in our brain to figure out how to translate that into meaning of language. And then later, there's something like 150 muscles that all have to be coordinated through fine motor skills in order to make an utterance, in order for me to exhale air in a form that translates into something you receive in your ear as a sound wave, and then electrically translate into your brain. And I hope that idea lands. It's incredible. It's amazing.
Mhm.
But that's the thing, is that we do this all naturally,
Yeah.
but having that environment in which you can build the skills to then leverage problem solving as a mindset, or to build executive function. And I think, again, even another sensitive period, one that Burke will be entering soon, is at around 15 months. This is all plus or minus, right? But there's a concept called theory of mind. Around 15 months is when
Right.
we start getting some self-awareness that we are an individual in the world. We are a human.
Right.
There's a really fun test that people do for this, where they have like a sticker or like a smudge they put on the kid's face, and they show them a mirror, and the kid never notices the smudge on their face. There's just something in the mirror. And then one day you show it to them and they're like, the heck is that thing?
Mhm.
And that's kind of one of the triggers of, oh, they're entering theory of mind.
Right.
They know they have some self-awareness that they are the thing that has the thing on its head that shouldn't be there. But at that point, you can start teaching certain kinds of skills that would be self-regulatory. So even from maybe 15 to 18 months and then on to 36 months, there's the sensitive period, or a hypothesized sensitive period, where we're more tuned in to, or more receptive to, learning the initial tools of self-regulation. So learning regulatory tools for, our emotional responses, and then implementing those tools. So one of the things I think is really awesome to teach kids around 15 to 18 months through about 36 months, it takes about that long to teach kids, is just slow breathing in response to
Right.
big emotions.
Right. Well,
And then you have a tool. And then once they learn to do it themselves, then they have a self-regulatory tool. And that self-regulatory tool likely will probably find pure causal pathways to correlates to executive function. Simple.
Right.
I'm sure that research will happen.
Yeah. Well, something else that has emerged, and I mean, this warrants an episode unto itself. I'm sure is the notion of like intergenerational transmission of behavior, right?
Yeah.
The example that I'm sure I cited on every podcast is the Dutch hunger famine, right? So that population, the infants or in utero, exposed to extreme stress, from the mother, the uncertainty of, hey, am I going to be alive at the end of the day? And then scarcity of resources. It's not a surprise that next generation, I think it's 2-3 generations beyond, There's an increased incidence of paranoid schizophrenia and obesity, which, coming back to your saber-toothed tiger example, it's like, hey, it kind of makes sense to be a little paranoid, if you were, subject to war times, and it makes sense to store nutrients if they were in few and short supply. So and then so the reason I bring this up is, there's this idea of neurodivergence that is emergent, that psychologists speak to. And, I wonder how much of that is a product of our genetics, or product of early childhood development, or a product of, again, intergenerational transmission of preset behaviors, because the environment changes faster than our DNA can, but our expression profiles can change pretty quick. Like going back to your notion of the cell as a single unit. Yeah, I mean, the expression profiles in each differentiated cell is different. And then depending on where you are, what you're doing, certain expression profiles are more advantageous, presumably. And so those become habit, for sake of a better word. It's like a molecular habit, if you will. So, I mean, I wonder how much of that, with all the research that you're starting to see come out on, epigenetic signal and pattern. Like there's a study I saw, I think it was just this week, that talks about, young children exposed to stress or trauma, and basically a certain set of epigenetic imprinting correlates with their either increased or decreased ability to adapt or be resilient in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's some crazy research on that one.
Yeah.
And especially when you dig into some of those, not to derail it, but they've tied it together now pretty straightforward to allostatic load.
Okay. Yeah.
So an allostatic load can be measured through a whole bunch of blood markers and a couple other observational things.
Right.
But yeah, it does seem to correlate to certain negative experiences in utero and in early childhood. Definitely dampen your allostatic load parameters, which is directly related to biological resilience. And just to level set on resilience, I like the, Bruce McEwen's and their terms in biology, which is just the ability to recover quickly and fully from a change.
Right.
And that's all resilience really is. And you think about it, emotional stress, physical stressors, you go and you do a lot of physical activity and you're really sore for 4 days and you're all whomped out because you don't train. But then if you train, then there's that training effect,
Yeah.
different, like,
Yeah.
it's the same thing. It's just how you do that. And there's a lot of these things that affect the biological systems, which kind of govern that.
Right.
Yeah. All these sensitive periods for different experiences.
Yeah. Well, hey, look, I'm want to be conscious of your time. You're always so generous with it. And I think, selfishly, and that's just, maybe unselfishly for the folks listening, I'm most interested now in, what comes after year one. Right. So I know we talked a little bit about this kind of mosaic of emotional development that we're starting to see as Brooke is starting to assert herself in the world as a personality. And maybe we can just kind of finish up with what your vision for, Fantastic Dads is. So we've done the 52-week playbook. How many playbooks do you have lined up in the future? And, what, if any, is your, kind of launch plan to get this out to the broader community?
Yeah, that's all good stuff. And I feel like I didn't fully answer into what is fatherhood, but I think in the end, bringing it back to fatherhood is really about this concept called self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is just your belief in yourself that you can navigate new things and challenges and you can get through them. And it's not really associated with false confidence, like puffing up, I got this, when you are really just winging it.
Yeah.
So I think that, again, in a system, the lever or the knob to turn for any guy is how well prepared and confident and well packed is your bag for all the different challenges that your unique situation and your unique family throw at you.
Right.
And so for some families, it's establishing those values and living by the values. Other families, the credo. Other families, it's managing the stressors. And for every family, it's different. But again,
Right.
you have to have a lens to look through, to know what tools to pull from, to know how to use them in those times of need. And that's what the playbooks do. That's what Fantastic Dads is really I'm here as a problem solver and as somebody who's put in a great deal of time and effort and lives this in my family and in my community, to capture what are the first principles of all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I even say within Fantastic Dads, it's not about parenting, because I think parenting is a false concept. I don't like the concept of parenting from a language perspective. Like child rearing a lot. I think you're bringing up a child. You're trying to be somebody in a child's life that helps them be the best that they can be. You are there to help them realize some potential, and you likely, regardless of how much intuition you have, which I think that's very, very important, it's just the lens to look through every once in a while. You don't need somebody like me or somebody else as an expert telling you what to do and this is right, this is wrong. No, it's really about, hey, have you considered this lens to look through? Like
Mm-hmm.
one of those in year where, in the second year playbook is the first year foundation and second year structures, is that in that playbook, a lot of it is about the mental models of developing that coach's eye. So when you get into what they call the terrible twos or the teenagers, or again, all these different cultural words for, how horrible 2-year-olds and toddlers are, is that I don't find them that way. I find them amazing, incredible creatures. And the reason why, and the thing that I think helps a lot of other parents make the switch, is that if you look at behavior as a form of communication, and the communication that is being given right now is, I do or do not know how to navigate this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, it's much more simple. You're not going to be 100%. We're all imperfect. You're able to look at it and go, all right, my kid is absolutely whining about everything. It's nails on a chalkboard for me. I absolutely hate this. And you can be unproductive and unhelpful in that moment. Or you can say, wow, that's really interesting. Why are they doing this? Oh, they didn't sleep last night. Well, last night, maybe, maybe I had cake before bed or whatever. I don't know. And at that point, you can start realizing that there are patterns to that, and you can start helping them build those skills. So a lot of times, even just the tantrums, the emotional dysregulation from, age 15 months to about 36 months, a lot of that just stems from something's new. I don't
Yeah.
know
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the thing I want to do. I'm frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, if you think of it as frustrating for you as a parent, it is frustrating for the kid too. You guys are
Mm-hmm.
both going through heck.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're both going through heck, you might as well go to it together. Like the old Forrest Gump movie where they're back to back so they don't have to sleep with their heads in the mud.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see that as, hey, my kid's upset and dysregulated because they're lacking in a certain skill, what skill are they missing, and how can I scaffold that skill for them over the course of a period of time?
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, you've got a kid who now you've built self-efficacy because you can do it.
Right.
The kid is building a skill so they can self-regulate as they grow older and learn. That's contributing to their overall executive function down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And now they can solve problems for themselves. So they're getting self-efficacy.
Right.
So it's about that. And each of the playbooks really works on the tools and the first principles in these windows of time. The one I'm most excited about is our grassroots sports.
Right.
This is everything from parents who want their kids to be in sport to how we develop movement and athleticism, and
Mm-hmm.
when does athleticism start to build. The hint is around 8 years old and onward. And then what you do if you, like many fathers, are going to be part of grassroots sports where you're a volunteer coach.
Mm-hmm.
How do you become the leader in the lives of people in your neighborhood who are looking to you to help their kid develop as a human being through sport?
Mm-hmm.
How do we do that in a fun way, in a developmentally appropriate way, and in a way that just maximizes who a kid can be? Again, executive function, self-efficacy, problem solving. There's, just down to first principles. So that's the whole idea. Playbooks are really cool because they come with an online component. They're always paced, so you only get one piece of information a week, which is creating those routines,
Right.
which are very important for families. And then they have a community aspect. I also try to do a lot where I do audio versions of most things so that you can listen to it instead of read it. There's usually a short form version of things, or a long form version. And then I'm currently working on a giant research resource. So if you really want to know the nuts and bolts of just my notes, then I'm making those all access as well. And you can comment in them. And because I think to understand fatherhood, we all have to understand it together.
Love it.
So I'm trying to find the way to invite people into the journey and building it too. Because again, I don't really believe in experts per se, because you never know enough and you always have blind spots. Means you can't be an expert.
Right. I mean,
Anyway,
yeah, no,
thanks.
I mean, it sounds like you've built this nucleus for, a self-organization that could happen with good intent fathers to contribute.
Exactly.
Yeah. A chaotic process that is the combination of like chaos and order, which is how all nature works. One of my favorite words, coined by D. Hawk, who founded the company Visa. But it is like the right blend of, variety and order. Chaos is not the best. Chaos kind of sounds destructive, but different.
Wilson has a good one. It just consilience. Just the
Okay,
melding of all the understandings of something into one uniform understanding.
there you go.
I like
Yeah,
that one
and
too.
and so I know you've been working on like changes to the site. Is there like a formal launch time for that, or are you just kind of playing it by ear at this point?
Uh, Currently I'm gunning for the end of 2024 to have the site accessible in a new format.
Yeah.
Probably won't be full featured for a handful of months after that, just because I have a day job, and while this is a big passion of mine, how there's just only so many hours in a day. But of course, anybody that wants to jump in on it earlier, get in touch, or anything, is just reach out. I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah. Well, Brand, I can't thank you enough. Like as a dad who was, totally out in the middle of the Pacific, in hurricanes and rudderless, it was amazing to be, reconnected with you and into the beginnings of this community. This whole notion of this, systems approach, empowering community, yeah, with knowledge is, it's unprecedented. And learning even more about your philosophy today, like this notion of the coach, and yeah, your vision to essentially help every child unlock their potential through
Fathers.
first principles, right.
Yeah.
So,
And then answer their dads.
yeah. So, hey, I'm sure we're going to have many more conversations like this, as if you're open to it, like certainly I think this is hugely beneficial to me. I mean, I share this with, a lot of folks in my community, and every time that like new dads are like, really, that exists? I'm like, yeah, you need to get on it. And so, I'm getting great feedback from the new dads that I point this to. So, you are making, drops with, like, I think what we're going to see is like massive ripple effects. So I just, want to take this moment to thank you for everything that you've been doing. I really appreciate you. And I'm sure I'm echoing the sentiments to any fantastic dad listeners who are out there. Like, keep going and, lean on us, your community to help you with this. Like, knowing, speaking as a solopreneur, I know what that feels like to be in an echo chamber. So, know that we're here anytime, for you to, to test out your ideas and to amplify the good that you're doing. So I thank you so much, Brandon.
Yeah. No, thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for having me today. Thank you for all you're doing by having your podcast and getting the interesting conversations you do out. And also, thank you for just being the guy you are in your family. They're lucky to have you. So,
Thanks so much. All right. Thank you so much for joining us on this very special episode of the DNA of Things, reflecting on my first year as a father with Brandon Larson. Has been a journey of rediscovery, redefining human development, family dynamics, and how to nurture the next generation. This conversation offers powerful tools and perspectives to those dedicated to fostering resilience and creativity and growth in the next generation. Now, if this resonated with you, please share it with someone who is invested in shaping the future through human development. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the DNA of things.